I don't care who he says he is, the woman's voice shrieked, a sound so sharp it seemed to slice through the quiet suburban air. He doesn't belong here. He's dangerous. Can't you see what's happening? He needs to be arrested. Her face was a blotchy crimson, her hair a wild mess, and flecks of spittle flew from her lips as she screamed at the top of her lungs. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at a tall black man who stood in perfect, silent composure, his hands now cuffed behind his back. His face was a mask of pure heartbreak, his eyes fixed on a little blonde girl sobbing hysterically. "Daddy, Daddy, please don't take my daddy!" The 8-year-old's voice cracked, raw with terror, as she reached for the man being led away. "He didn't do anything wrong, please. He's my daddy." The woman who had made the call, whose frantic screams had brought 3 police cruisers to this placid street, felt a surge of pure vindication. She had done it. She had rid her neighborhood of the problem. She stood there, breathing heavily, watching with grim satisfaction as her dangerous neighbor was loaded into the back of a police car. What she didn't know was that she had just made the most catastrophic mistake of her life. A mistake she would live to regret. Because the one person on earth who could save her dying child was the very man she had just destroyed. The man she had humiliated before the entire neighborhood. The man whose daughter she had traumatized only hours before. This is a story of karma so swift and so precise it will leave you speechless, questioning everything you think you know about judgment, prejudice, and the devastating consequences of our actions. To understand how everything went so catastrophically wrong, we must first meet the people whose lives were about to become forever intertwined by one woman's terrible misjudgment. Because sometimes the most devastating conflicts begin with the most innocent of intentions. Marcus Williams was 38 years old. Seeing him on the street, you might make certain assumptions. At 6'2", with a powerful build and arms covered in a tapestry of intricate tattoos, he could certainly look intimidating. But the ink that adorned his arms told a different story. They were not symbols of rebellion, but memorials. Each design was a story of a fallen comrade from his tours in Afghanistan, a tribute to the men and women who never made it home. Woven among them were the symbols of his other calling, caduceus, hearts, and dates marking the lives he'd saved as one of the country's most skilled pediatric trauma surgeons. Marcus had recently moved to Willowbrook, an upscale enclave where the houses were pristine and the lawns were manicured. He hadn't come here to prove a point. He had moved for 2 simple reasons. The school district was superb, and his new home was just 12 minutes from the children's hospital. 12 minutes that could mean the difference between life and death for a child. But Marcus was not living this life alone. Zipping through their new house, exploring every room with the boundless excitement only an 8-year-old can possess, was Sophia Williams. With bright blonde hair that seemed to trap the sunlight and crystal blue eyes sparkling with curiosity, Sophia was pure joy in human form. She was artistic and bubbly, a little girl who saw the world as a canvas of endless possibility. She painted pictures for her daddy, left him little notes, and followed him around as if he were her personal superhero, because to her, he was. Sophia had no memory of her biological father. Army Sergeant Jake Morrison had been killed by an IED in Afghanistan when she was just a baby, leaving behind a daughter he had barely known. But Jake's best friend, Marcus, had made a battlefield promise over his friend's dying body. He had promised to love that little girl as if she were his own, to protect her, to give her the life Jake would have wanted for her. And for 8 years, Marcus had honored that promise every single day. The adoption was finalized when Sophia was 2. She had never known any father but Marcus. She called him Daddy because that's what he was. She had his last name, his unconditional love, and his fierce protection, that her skin was the color of cream and his the rich hue of coffee, that her hair was blonde and his was black. These were details as irrelevant to them as the color of the sky. Love had forged their family, and that was all that mattered. But not everyone saw it that way. 3 houses down lived Karen Mitchell, a 42-year-old woman whose life had been slowly crumbling for years. A once successful real estate agent, her business had dwindled as her reputation for being difficult spread. She was also the self-appointed coordinator of the neighborhood watch, a role she embraced with an unnerving intensity. Karen lived alone in a house that echoed with the ghosts of the family that once filled its rooms. Divorced for 3 years, she shared custody of her 7-year-old son Tyler, who visited only every other weekend. Tyler was a sweet, gentle boy who had his father's kind heart, but what Karen never advertised was the secret terror that governed her life. Tyler had been born with a rare heart condition that required constant monitoring. Every minor chest pain, every bout of fatigue sent Karen spiraling into anxiety. The fear of losing him had curdled inside her, turning her suspicious, controlling, and deeply bitter. The neighborhood held others too. Detective James Rodriguez, a veteran cop who could distinguish a real threat from a paranoid complaint, and Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, a 77-year-old retired nurse who had lived on Maple Street for 40 years and possessed the wisdom to see people for who they truly were. But on this particular Tuesday morning, just 3 days after Marcus and Sophia moved in, none of them knew their lives were about to collide. Inside their new home, Marcus and Sophia were in the kitchen, a cheerful mess of flour and scattered chocolate chips, putting the final touches on a batch of cookies. It had been Sophia's idea to bake a welcome gift for their neighbors. "Daddy, can we put extra chocolate chips in Mrs. Karen's cookies?" Sophia asked, perched on a step stool. "Of course, sweetheart. That's very thoughtful of you," Marcus replied, his heart swelling as he watched her concentrate. They arranged the warm cookies in a wicker basket with some gourmet coffee and a handwritten note. "Hello, we're your new neighbors, looking forward to being part of this wonderful community, the Williams family." It was a simple, innocent gesture, the kind that should have been the start of a friendship. Instead, it was the trigger for a nightmare. As Marcus and Sophia walked up the pristine path to Karen's front door, she was watching from her living room window. What she saw sent her mind racing. A large, tattooed black man walking beside a small, white child. In the landscape of Karen's fear, there was no room for an innocent explanation. Her mind didn't conjure a loving, modern family. It conjured headlines of trafficking and kidnapping. When Marcus knocked, Karen opened the door only as far as the security chain would allow. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice already hostile. Marcus smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on Sophia's shoulder. "Hi there, I'm Marcus and this is Sophia. We just moved in a few doors down and wanted to introduce ourselves." Karen's eyes darted between them, the gears of suspicion turning visibly in her mind. Something was wrong with this picture. "Is that your daughter?" The question was heavy with disbelief. Marcus's smile never wavered, though a flicker of weariness crossed his eyes. It was a question he had heard before, in grocery stores, at school events, everywhere. "Yes, she is. We brought you some cookies Sophia helped bake." Sophia, oblivious to the tension, piped up, "I put extra chocolate chips in them. Daddy says chocolate makes everything better." But Karen was unmoved. "I don't accept food from strangers," she said coldly, "and I'd prefer if you stayed on your side of the property line." The rejection hit Sophia like a physical blow. Her bright smile vanished, her face clouded with confusion. She looked up at her father, unable to understand. Keeping his voice calm, Marcus said, "Of course. Well, if you ever need anything, we're right here." As they walked away, Sophia whispered, "Daddy, why didn't she like our cookies?" "Some people just need a little time to make new friends, sweetheart, that's all." But Marcus knew it was never about the cookies. The moment they were gone, Karen was on the phone. "You won't believe what just moved in," she said, her voice a conspiratorial hiss. "A big black man with some little white girl. Something is not right, Linda, I'm telling you." "Maybe she's adopted," her friend suggested. But Karen's mind was made up. "I'm keeping an eye on this situation," she declared. "Someone needs to protect these children." With those words, Karen appointed herself Sophia's savior, blind to the fact that she was about to wage war on the very man who had devoted his life to loving and protecting that little girl. She had no idea that the man she saw as a threat would soon become the only person in the world who could save her own child. What followed was a systematic campaign of harassment, disguised as civic duty. Karen Mitchell had convinced herself she was doing the right thing. In the warped narrative she had constructed, she wasn't being racist or cruel. She was being vigilant. Her investigation began the next morning at 7:30 a.m. From her bedroom window, armed with binoculars and a smartphone, she watched Marcus patiently braid Sophia's blonde hair. She photographed him walking Sophia to the bus stop, holding her backpack as she chattered happily beside him. Karen zoomed in on every interaction, searching for evidence of what exactly. She wasn't sure, but in her twisted logic, something had to be wrong. She documented Marcus kneeling down to listen to Sophia describe an art project, and the moment Sophia threw her arms around his neck before running into school. To any rational observer, it was a portrait of love. To Karen, it was a file of damning evidence. She took her concerns to Sophia's new school. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was a woman who held sway. She had sold houses to half the school board. She was the neighborhood watch coordinator. Her calls were returned. When she marched into the principal's office with a folder of photos, she was taken seriously. In a private meeting with the teacher, Mrs. Patterson, and Assistant Principal Collins, Karen laid out her case. "I'm concerned about Sophia Williams," she began, spreading the photos. "She's living with a man who, well, he doesn't look like family. You might want to check if everything's legitimate." Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable, but Collins, who owed Karen for finding his family their dream home, leaned in. "What exactly are your concerns?" "Look at these," Karen urged. "The way he's always touching her, hovering. And have you seen his tattoos? What kind of father figure is covered in tattoos?" Mrs. Patterson tried to interject. "Mr. Williams seems like a very caring father. Sophia speaks of him with such—" Collins cut her off. "Karen, you've always had excellent instincts. If you're concerned, we should look into this. Mrs. Patterson, I want you to keep a close eye on the situation. Document anything unusual." Karen left feeling vindicated. Mrs. Patterson left with a stone in the pit of her stomach. But she was new, and Collins was her superior. She felt she had no choice. Week 2 brought a new level of escalation. At the community pool, Karen watched Marcus gently teach Sophia to swim. She saw him carefully apply sunscreen to Sophia's fair skin, braid her hair, and share in her easy laughter. She saw their obvious bond, their genuine joy, and interpreted it all as suspicious. She approached the pool manager, a man whose job she had helped secure. "Tom," she said, "that man with the little blonde girl. I don't think they're legitimate residents. Can you check their credentials?" What followed was one of the most humiliating experiences of Marcus's life. Pool staff publicly demanded his identification and proof of residency in front of dozens of families. The casual chatter died down. Children stopped splashing. Parents exchanged loaded glances. Sophia, frightened by the sudden attention, clung to her father's arm. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, summoning every ounce of his military discipline to remain calm. "Just routine verification, sir," the manager said, though his tone was anything but routine. Marcus calmly provided the documentation, but the damage was done. Karen's suspicions had been publicly validated. Now, everyone was watching. "Daddy, why did that man want to see your papers?" Sophia whispered as they left. "Sometimes adults have to show their cards, sweetheart. It's nothing to worry about." But Marcus was worried. He could feel the community's attitude shifting, like a tide turning against them. In the third week, Karen's campaign crossed the line from harassment into something far more dangerous. She filed multiple noise complaints, which, thanks to her city hall connections, resulted in official visits to investigate Sophia's 30-minute afternoon piano practice. But her most devastating act was calling Child Protective Services. "I have concerns about a living situation," she told the hotline operator, identifying herself as the neighborhood watch coordinator to lend her report credibility. "A small white child is living with a black man who claims to be her father. I've been documenting concerning behavior." CPS took her seriously and launched a full investigation. Karen began following them everywhere, taking photos, building her case file, and poisoning the well with other parents. "I'm not saying anything definitive," she'd say, "but the school is monitoring the situation and CPS has been called. We should all be watching out for our children." Through it all, Sophia began to fade. The bright, bubbly girl who had moved to Willowbrook was being replaced by a child who was anxious and withdrawn. She started asking questions that shattered her father's heart. "Daddy, why does that lady always take our picture? Why don't the other kids want to play with me? Did I do something wrong?" Marcus found himself trying to explain the complexities of adult prejudice to an 8-year-old. "Some people just aren't used to families that look like ours, sweetheart," he explained one night sitting on her bed. "But love makes a family, not what we look like. You are my daughter in every single way that matters, and nothing anyone says can ever change that." But even as he held his daughter, comforting her, Marcus was struggling with his own silent agony, facing a battle he didn't know how to fight. The very community Marcus had chosen for its promise of acceptance was now turning on them, poisoned by the prejudice and paranoia of a single woman. And because Karen had influence, her venom seeped into the neighborhood's bloodstream, spreading faster and deeper than any simple rumor. Her campaign of harassment was building to a frightening climax, a testament to the terrifying intersection of prejudice and power, where fear invariably suffocates common sense. The official knock came on a Tuesday morning, sharp and impersonal, while Sophia was at school. When Marcus opened the door, he found a woman in a business suit holding a clipboard and a badge that sent a chill of ice through his veins. "Dr. Williams," she said, "I'm Sarah Chen from Child Protective Services. We've received a report concerning your daughter and I need to conduct a welfare check." For a moment, the floor seemed to drop away from under him. He had been steeling himself for this since Karen's harassment began, but the anticipation did nothing to blunt the blow. "Of course," he managed, stepping aside. "Whatever you need." The investigation was both thorough and violating. The caseworker inspected every room, scrutinizing their life for any sign of neglect. She examined his adoption papers, his medical credentials, his military service records. She asked deeply personal questions about his bond with Sophia, their routines, their history. After 3 hours, her professional skepticism had curdled into a quiet, simmering anger. Not at him, but at the person who had instigated this violation. "Dr. Williams," she said, packing her files, "it is abundantly clear this was a malicious report. Sophia is obviously loved and exceptionally well cared for. There is absolutely no evidence of wrongdoing. I am so sorry you were put through this." Marcus thanked her, but the damage was done. That night, old terrors returned to Sophia for the first time in years. She woke up screaming, her small body trembling as she asked if someone was going to take her away from him. But Karen was relentless. If her targeted complaints had failed, she would simply escalate, rallying the entire neighborhood to her crusade. She organized a community safety meeting, plastering flyers on every door and posting announcements in every local social media group. The agenda was ominous: protecting our children and maintaining neighborhood standards. That Thursday, dozens of residents, many genuinely worried by Karen's dire warnings, crowded into the community center. Karen stood before them, armed with a presentation of photos and charts, her supposed evidence of the threat in their midst. The tipping point arrived on a bright, cloudless Saturday afternoon. Marcus had decided to teach Sophia some basic life skills, starting with their car. After changing the oil, he was showing her how to change a tire. "Everyone should know this, sweetheart," Marcus explained, demonstrating the proper use of a car jack. "These are skills that will serve you your whole life." Sophia, dwarfed by her pink overalls and oversized safety goggles, was captivated. She giggled as she struggled to turn a lug nut with a wrench nearly as big as her arm, Marcus's patient hands guiding hers. It was a scene of pure, uncomplicated love, a father patiently teaching his daughter a practical skill. But viewed through the warped lens of Karen's suspicion, the idyllic moment was twisted into something sinister. "He's teaching that poor child criminal skills," she muttered, her phone already in her hand. "This is how they do it. Teach them how to steal cars for their trafficking rings." In the fevered logic of her paranoia, a lesson in self-sufficiency became a tutorial in crime. A man showing his child how to change a tire was now grooming her for a life of auto theft. Without another thought, she dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency?" "There's a suspicious black man with a white child on Maple Street," Karen said, her voice a carefully crafted tremor of feigned panic. "I think she's in danger. He's teaching her to tamper with a vehicle. He could be involved in car theft or human trafficking." "Ma'am, can you describe what you're seeing?" "He has her using tools on a car, teaching her criminal skills. You need to get here immediately before something terrible happens to that little girl." As Karen weaponized her fear, she remained blissfully unaware of the cruel tapestry fate was weaving. In just a few hours, her own son's life would hang by a thread, and the only person in the world who could save him was the very man she was trying to destroy. The sudden shriek of sirens tore through the quiet Saturday afternoon. 2 patrol cars screamed to a halt in front of the Williams house, their flashing lights painting the street in strokes of red and blue. Neighbors crept from their homes, phones raised to record the unfolding drama. Marcus looked up from the tire, confusion and a cold dread washing over him. He knew with a sinking certainty that this was Karen's doing. Still, the sight of flashing lights reflecting off his own home sent a primal surge of adrenaline through him. Sophia, terrified, hid behind his legs, her small hands clutching his jeans. "Officers," Marcus said, his voice steady as he rose slowly, keeping his hands visible. Years of military discipline took over, a calm veneer settling over his roiling fear. "Is there a problem?" The lead officer, Sergeant Murphy, approached. "Sir, we received a call about suspicious activity involving a vehicle and a child." "I'm teaching my daughter how to change a tire," Marcus explained, gesturing to the car. "And this is your daughter?" the officer asked, glancing down at Sophia. "Yes, sir. This is Sophia. I'm Marcus Williams." He reached slowly for his wallet. "I have my ID and all her adoption paperwork right here." But before he could retrieve it, Karen hurried across her lawn, her face alight with the thrill of vindication. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," she called, brandishing a folder of her surveillance photos. "I'm the one who called. Something is not right about him having that white child. You need to check if she's really his." The second officer, Davis, turned back to Marcus. "Sir, do you have documentation of guardianship?" Without a word, Marcus produced his wallet and handed over the folded, worn documents he always carried for exactly this reason. Adoption decrees, court orders, everything. As Officer Davis examined the papers, Karen pressed on, spreading her photos on the hood of the patrol car. "Look at this. He's always touching her, and today, teaching her to use tools on cars. What innocent father teaches a child criminal skills?" "Officer," Marcus said, his jaw tight, "I was teaching my 8-year-old a basic life skill." "Or preparation for auto theft?" Karen scoffed. Sophia, her voice trembling, finally spoke. "Daddy didn't do anything wrong. He was just teaching me." "See?" Karen pounced. "She calls him daddy. A white child calling a black man daddy? Something is seriously wrong here." The officers exchanged a look. The paperwork seemed legitimate, but Karen's accusations were serious. They felt they had to be cautious. "Sir," Sergeant Murphy said, "we're going to need you to come to the station just to verify everything." "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked, his heart breaking as he saw the sheer terror in Sophia's eyes. "You're being detained for questioning," Murphy replied, reaching for his handcuffs. The click of the handcuffs was a sound that would echo in Marcus's nightmares for months. As the cold steel closed around his wrists, Sophia's fragile composure shattered. A raw, piercing scream tore from her throat. "Daddy, don't take my daddy. He didn't do anything wrong. Please, he's my daddy." Marcus felt his own heart crack as they led him away. "Please," he said to the officers. "You're scaring her." Karen, seizing the moment, called out to the recording phones. "See how she's reacting? That's not normal. She's been conditioned. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent." As the patrol car pulled away, Sophia collapsed into a neighbor's arms, sobbing. The image was devastating. A small, blonde girl, crying inconsolably as her father was led away in handcuffs. But the true, staggering irony of the moment had yet to reveal itself. At the police station, Detective James Rodriguez was reviewing the file when his desk phone rang. The caller ID flashed. Children's Hospital. A call from there on a Saturday night was never good news. "Detective Rodriguez?" "Detective, this is Patricia Morgan at Children's Hospital. We have a critical situation. Dr. Marcus Williams was scheduled to perform emergency surgery on a 7-year-old boy in cardiac arrest. The child is fading fast, and Dr. Williams is our only pediatric trauma surgeon on call. Where is he?" Rodriguez felt his blood run cold. "Did you say Dr. Williams?" "Yes, Marcus Williams, head of pediatric trauma surgery." "We can't reach him. This child is dying, detective. We need him now." Rodriguez glanced through the holding cell window at Marcus, who sat with his head in his hands. "The man brought in on a suspicious activity charge? African-American with a white daughter?" "I don't know about a daughter, but yes, Dr. Williams is African-American." "What is going on? Why do you have one of our most respected surgeons in custody?" The weight of the situation slammed into Rodriguez. The respected surgeon, the missing doctor, the man who could save a dying child, was sitting in one of his holding cells. "I'll call you back," he said, hanging up and rushing toward the cell. At that exact moment, across town, Karen's phone rang. It was her ex-husband, David. "Karen," he said, his voice strained with panic. "You need to get to Children's Hospital. Now. It's Tyler. He collapsed at his soccer game. They think it's his heart." Each word was a physical blow. Her son, her baby. She dropped everything and sped across the city, her world narrowing to a single point of terror. She found David and his wife in the emergency waiting room, their faces pale with shock. "He just collapsed on the field," David managed. His heart stopped. A nurse approached them. "Are you Tyler Mitchell's family? Your son is in critical condition. He needs immediate surgery to repair a congenital heart defect. We're trying to locate our pediatric trauma surgeon, but there's been a delay." "What delay?" Karen demanded, panic clawing at her throat. "Get him here, whatever it takes." "Ma'am, Dr. Williams is the best in the state. He's saved hundreds of children. We can't find him, and your son doesn't have much time." The circle of a terrible irony was now complete. A child was dying, and the surgeon who could save him was in jail, put there by the child's own mother. But Karen, lost in her own storm of grief, would not learn this devastating truth for several more agonizing hours. As she paced the waiting room, the hospital administrator, Patricia Morgan, approached her with a grave expression. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to speak with you privately." In a small conference room, Karen's heart hammered against her ribs. "Did you find Dr. Williams? Is he on his way?" Patricia took a deep breath. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've located him, but I need to ask you something. Do you live on Maple Street in Willowbrook?" Karen blinked, confused. "Yes, but what does that have to do with anything?" "And did you," Patricia asked, her voice level, "call the police today about a suspicious man with a child in your neighborhood?" The question hung in the sterile air. Karen's breath caught in her throat. The administrator's words didn't make sense, and yet they made a horrifying, impossible kind of sense. Her face drained of all color as the pieces of her afternoon, the phone call, the police, the man with the little girl, slammed into the pieces of her evening, the frantic calls, the missing surgeon, her dying son. The truth, monstrous and undeniable, began to dawn. "No," she whispered, her head shaking in denial. No, that can't be. The man. Oh, God, what have I done?" For 3 hours, Marcus Williams had been sitting in the cold, sterile environment of police custody. His world had been upended by a single 911 call from a neighbor, a frantic voice claiming he was engaged in suspicious activity with a child. That child was his legally adopted daughter, and the suspicious activity was a lesson in basic car maintenance, held in the familiar comfort of their own driveway. In a hospital waiting room not far away, Karen Mitchell collapsed into a chair, the full weight of her actions crashing down on her like an avalanche. "I thought I was protecting," she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper. "Oh God, my son is going to die because of what I did." "Dr. Williams is being released as we speak and should be here within 20 minutes, a nurse named Patricia informed her, her voice devoid of warmth. "But Mrs. Mitchell, what you did today nearly cost your own child his life. I hope you understand the gravity of that." Karen was hyperventilating now, the room spinning. The man she had stalked, harassed, and ultimately had arrested was the only person on earth who could save her son, Tyler. The dangerous criminal she had imagined, the threat she had been so desperate to remove from her neighborhood, was a pediatric surgeon whose entire career was a monument to saving children. In her haze of prejudice and hatred, she had traumatized a little girl, destroyed an innocent family, and nearly killed her own son. 25 minutes later, the elevator doors slid open. Marcus Williams stepped out, still wearing the clothes he'd been arrested in. His hair was disheveled, and exhaustion was etched into every line of his face. Yet, he moved with the focused urgency of a man who knew a child's life was measured in seconds. Karen looked up from where she sat, sobbing in the hallway. She recognized him instantly. This was the man whose life she had tried to ruin just hours before. The man she had labeled a predator. Now, he was her son's only hope. Marcus saw her too. He saw the tear-streaked face and the crumpled posture, and a flicker of recognition crossed his features. For a brief suspended moment, their eyes met across the sterile corridor. Karen braced for anger, for hatred, for the contempt she so richly deserved. Instead, what she saw in his expression was worse, a profound and weary sadness. A deep, soul-crushing disappointment. She stood up shakily and approached him, her voice barely audible. "Please," she whispered, I know what I did. I know I was wrong about everything. But please, don't let my son pay for my mistakes." Marcus looked at this woman, the woman who had spent weeks trying to tear his family apart, who had terrified his daughter, who had cost him precious hours that could have been spent saving lives. And without a moment's hesitation, he spoke, his voice steady despite the fatigue. "Ma'am, I took an oath to save lives. Your son will get the best care I can possibly provide." The surgery took 4 agonizing hours. Karen waited, a ghost in the hallway, flanked by her husband David and her sister Sarah, who had gradually learned the devastating truth. David was a storm of quiet fury. Sarah was numb with disgust. Karen was consumed by a guilt so profound she felt it might physically tear her apart. "You spent weeks harassing the man who is now fighting to save our son's life." David's voice was low, but his anger was a palpable force in the still air. "Karen, what is wrong with you?" "I thought I was protecting children," she whispered, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "I thought something was wrong with that family." "The only thing wrong was in your own head," Sarah said, her usual kindness replaced by a cold, sharp edge. "You nearly killed Tyler with your racism and your paranoia." As the hours ticked by, another visitor arrived. It was Mrs. Hayes, a neighbor, and with her was Sophia Williams, the little girl Karen had convinced herself needed rescuing. Despite everything, Sophia walked directly over to the weeping woman. In her sweet 8-year-old voice, she asked, "Are you okay? Your little boy is going to be fine. My daddy saves kids all the time." Karen looked down at this beautiful, innocent child, the very child she had used as a justification for her vile campaign. Something inside her shattered. "Sweetie," Karen sobbed, "I am so sorry for what I did to you and your daddy. I was wrong about everything." Sophia considered this with the solemn expression children reserve for adult problems. "It's okay," she said finally. "Daddy says sometimes people are scared of things they don't understand. He says it doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them confused." In that moment, Karen realized she was looking at a child who possessed more wisdom, more grace, and more humanity in her small heart than Karen had shown in her entire adult life. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus Williams emerged from the operating room, pulling off his surgical cap. His scrubs were damp with sweat, but a tired smile touched his lips. Karen shot to her feet, her heart seizing in her chest. "Is he—" "Tyler is going to be fine," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "The procedure went perfectly. He should make a full recovery." Relief washed over Karen so intensely that her knees buckled, but as she looked at the man who had just saved her son, she knew that some mistakes leave scars that can never truly fade. The aftermath of that night would prove that actions have consequences, but it would also reveal that redemption is possible for those brave enough to face the truth. Within 48 hours, Karen's world began to unravel. The video of Marcus being arrested while teaching his daughter to change a tire went viral, spreading under the hashtag #JusticeForMarcusWilliams. The stark contrast between the gentle father-daughter moment and Karen's hysterical accusations ignited a firestorm of national outrage. The legal consequences were swift. She was charged with filing a false police report, harassment, and making fraudulent claims to Child Protective Services. But more devastating than any legal penalty was the complete annihilation of her life. The real estate board revoked her license. Her income vanished. The neighborhood that had once been fertile ground for her suspicions now turned on her, shunning her with a collective burning shame. She became a pariah on her own street. The most painful consequences, however, were personal. When Tyler woke up, he found Marcus checking his chart. "Are you the doctor who fixed my heart?" he asked. Marcus smiled warmly. "I am. How are you feeling, buddy?" "Better," Tyler said. Then his face grew serious. "Mom said she was mean to you. I'm sorry." Marcus sat beside the bed. "Tyler, you never have to apologize for anyone else. You just focus on getting better." But the boy pressed on with a child's startling honesty. "Mom was wrong, wasn't she? You're not scary. You're nice." "Sometimes," Marcus said carefully, "grown-ups make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." The conversations with her own family were brutal. "Your racism almost killed our son, Karen," David told her, his voice flat and dead. Sarah was just as blunt. "We can't trust you around him. What if you teach him to hate?" Even Tyler asked questions that pierced her soul. "Mommy, why were you mean to Dr. Williams? Can Sophia be my friend?" The final blow came from her own mother, Margaret, a woman who had lived through the civil rights movement. "I'm ashamed of what you've become," she said quietly in the hospital cafeteria. "You saw a loving father with his daughter and chose to see a monster. That is on you." Facing the real possibility of jail time, Karen was preparing for the worst when something unexpected happened. Marcus Williams requested a meeting with the prosecutor. "I don't want her to go to prison," he said. "I believe people can change if they're willing to do the work." He proposed an alternative: intensive community service at the hospital, mandatory racial bias counseling, and a public education campaign about the dangers of racial profiling. "Prison will just make her bitter," Marcus argued. "This might make her better." Karen was stunned by this act of grace. The man she had tried to destroy was offering her a path to redemption. The transformation was slow. For weeks she performed her duties at the children's hospital with a resentful heart. Then, 6 months in, she watched through an observation window as Marcus performed a grueling 8-hour emergency surgery on a 3-year-old girl. She saw his unwavering focus, his steady hands, his sheer dedication. When the child's parents collapsed in tears of gratitude, Karen finally understood. She hadn't just targeted a man. She had tried to rob the world of a hero. The lesson became even more personal as Tyler recovered. His best friend quickly became Sophia Williams. Watching them play together, their easy, innocent affection a constant reminder of her own blindness, forced Karen to confront the ugliest depths of her prejudice. 1 year to the day after Tyler's surgery, Karen published a letter in the local paper. It began, "I almost cost my son his life because of my prejudice against the very man who saved him. I looked at a loving father and saw only what my racist assumptions told me to see. Dr. Marcus Williams is a hero. I was the danger." The letter was a raw, unflinching confession, a warning against the poison of hatred. That same evening, Karen dropped Tyler off at the school's father-daughter dance. He had begged to go to see Sophia. Peering through the gymnasium window, Karen saw Marcus, dressed in a sharp suit, lifting a beaming Sophia into the air. They were both laughing. Tyler ran to join them, wrapping his arms around the man who had saved him. Taking a deep breath, Karen walked over. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she said quietly, "but thank you, and I'm so sorry for what I put your daughter through." Sophia looked at her father, who nodded gently. She turned to Karen with that same solemn wisdom. "It's okay, Mrs. Karen. Daddy says people can learn to be better." Marcus looked at Karen, his eyes holding no anger, only a quiet hope. "We all deserve a chance to grow." As Karen walked away, watching her son dancing, safe and loved, under the watchful eye of the very man she had tried to destroy, she understood. She had learned her lesson at an almost unimaginable cost. But in that learning, in that growth, there was hope, not just for her, but for anyone willing to confront their own darkness and choose instead to see the light in others.